I know telling a game is perfect is really subjective, but sometimes there are just games that hit all the right marks, making them nearly flawless. When something feels fresh, polished, and pulls you in so deeply that you forget you're even gaming, that's when you know it's special. So in this video, we'll showcase some of the games that may also hit the mark when you play it. Let's get things started with Metroid Prime Remastered. Now, Metroid Prime Remastered, it came out and instantly reminded players why they fell in love with it back on the GameCube. What Retro Studios did here isn't just a fresh coat of paint. It's the kind of remaster where every element feels like it was revisited and reconsidered. The visuals feel crisper and the lighting is dynamic. You walk through Talon 4 again, but now the rain hits Samus's visor in a way you swear wasn't really possible before. And that soundtrack, the mood is still there, haunting and evocative, perfectly capturing the planet's alien nature. The game's pacing hits that sweet spot, avoiding the frustration of modern handholding. Like, even in this year, you're still not getting a big arrow telling you where to go next. Scanning every nook and cranny remains essential, and it keeps those old-school exploration vibes alive. You've got that classic backtracking, where each new power-up reshapes how you see the map, kind of recontextualizing your previous runs through it. You can see how the remaster respects the original, but it's careful to smooth out rough edges. The controls feel tighter too, more familiar to anyone who's used dual-stick aiming in shooters now. It subtly brings Prime into a modern context without shifting the core experience players remember so well. It's a revival, not a reimagining, and that's where it really hits its mark for anyone who played it back in the day or newcomers opening its secrets for the first time. Next up is Hades. Supergiant Games nailed it with their fourth release, but this one feels different. You're Zagreus, trying to escape the underworld, and it's relentless. It's fun though, even when you're redoing those runs again, it's fun. Supergiant took everything they learned from Bastion, Transistor, and Pyre, then just layered it all into Hades. The art style alone, instantly recognizable, with this hand-drawn flair that jumps at you like a painting brought to life. And yet somehow they mix that with fast-paced, snappy combat, and it just works. But then there's the writing, which, like, is it even fair for a roguelike to have writing this good? Every failed run doesn't feel like a bummer because characters comment on it after you die. They remember. You die 50 times? That makes the game grow. And the gods? All these different gifts you get. It's never just about stats. It's personalities jumping through the screen. The way each keeps egging you on or showing disappointment in this quirky way adds depth to the pure adrenaline of hacking enemies up. And don't even get started on the music. Darren Korb, their in-house composer, does his thing, making these melodic riffs that loop constantly but never get old. Epic guitar licks in the background like you're wrestling with destiny. It's tight, refined, and despite its randomness, there's purpose behind every slash. It's one of those rare games where even the grind feels rewarding. Next on our list is Luigi's Mansion 3. I've got to admit, the Luigi experience is different. Luigi's Mansion 3 offers this spooky, cartoony space unlike anything else. And yes, keeping the franchise's identity intact after all these years was a feat. But the level of polish this third outing has kind of blows certain expectations out of the water. First off, it's absolutely gorgeous. Every floor in the haunted hotel has its own vibe. There's a medieval setting, a movie studio, an Egyptian tomb, yet somehow it doesn't feel like a bunch of mismatched ideas. It all fits this playful, puzzly tone where Luigi's cowardliness becomes, weirdly, what makes exploring so appealing. Then there's the ghost encounters. I'm telling you, slamming those ghosts with your vacuum has never been so satisfying. The combat has just enough depth to keep players engaged, but still remains lighthearted. Adding Guigi is genius, honestly. Suddenly, every puzzle you come across isn't as one note. You're swapping between Luigi and his gooey green counterpart, solving problems that feel like they could belong to a much bigger game. And yet, it's never overwhelming. It's constantly encouraging you to look at its world a bit closer, whether it's hiding coins behind tapestries or sneaking around something spooky. Luigi's trek through this mad hotel never forgets to have a bit of fun, even as he quakes in his boots. This next one, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, packs a punch when it comes to exploration and storytelling. It expands on Breath of the Wild in huge ways, but doesn't care about being a direct sequel. Instead, it deepens the same gigantic open world, creating something that feels both familiar and surprisingly fresh. At first, you'll think that you've been there before, until the sky islands pop out above, and suddenly everything feels vertical, layered. You're exploring Hyrule again, but with a twist. The Ultra Hand mechanics, that's where Nintendo gets weird. They let you stick objects together to create your own machines, literally feeling like they pulled in elements of a physics puzzle game and slapped it into Zelda. You can make vehicles, lifts, maybe even a flying contraption, and it's never just for show. You need these contraptions to explore this revamped world. Every moment feels purposeful, though. The game pushes classic exploration and discovery, but somehow cranks that up, always urging you to tinker, kind of relearning Hyrule through a different lens, you know? Journeying across the expansive world feels almost like a callback to rediscovering a childhood game you loved, but are seeing with fresh eyes. Now, we have Yoku's Island Express. Who looked at a pinball machine and thought what it's like if it was a Metroidvania? Whoever it was, they got it right because Yoku's Island Express might just be one of the most unique games players have ever touched. You're a small beetle. It's already weird, right? But instead of walking or jumping like a regular platformer, you're rolling this rock around an island and pinging off bumpers like it's a huge pinball table. And it feels so good. Now, the Metroidvania vibes are strong, but it's unlike anything typical. You unlock abilities like always, but instead of jetpacks or sword upgrades, well, it's stuff like slug vacuum devices, and it just fits. They've somehow married that pinball mechanic with tight, satisfying control, all while you're unfolding the map in every direction. Each region of the island is connected in these elaborate ways that keep you wondering how the heck anyone came up with it. The world itself? Quaint and bright, with charming characters who fit this easygoing island life, yet still give you complex quests that involve using your pinball abilities in clever ways. Playing it feels like coming across something totally unexpected, like rolling into a game thinking that this is going to be quirky, but then finding out there's genuine depth to the whole design. It's basically approachable yet creative in ways you never even thought about before. Up next, we have Pizza Tower. This game is madness, in the best way possible. This game doesn't care about looking clean or holding your hand. Instead, it's pure chaos, tapping into that anarchic, anything goes 90s cartoon vibe. You play as a big Italian chef, Peppino, who's had it with this evil pizza tower, so he's charging through levels with mechanics that blend classic Wario Land with the speed and momentum of a Sonic title. Yeah, it's wild like that, but then works perfectly. What makes Pizza Tower special is how the game never stops pushing you to go faster. Smashing through walls, launching into enemies, it's all about speed here. Unlike most platformers, where precision is everything, Peppino's weight and momentum have this frantic rhythm. 1 second you're stumbling, rolling on the floor. The next, you're barreling full speed ahead, basically wrecking whatever stands in your way. The controls feel goofy, yet somehow after a bit they click into place and you're moving like a madman through these colorful, wacky levels. The style, pure personality, hand-drawn visuals pumped full of energy, and the soundtrack, an absolute banger. Every riff has that perfect chaotic beat that matches Peppino's frenetic movements. And there's this score-chasing mechanic where the better your run, the more points you rack up. So levels tend to feel built for replays. Like even when you finish a stage, you know you could have gone faster and better. It's chaotic, it's funny, and it totally leans into its absurdity, especially if you love that frenetic cartoon energy.
I lived here until I was 11, but I wasn't allowed inside half the rooms.
Now, let's take a look at What Remains of Edith Finch. There aren't many games like What Remains of Edith Finch. You step into the shoes of Edith, walking through her family's creepy, bizarre house, which is filled with secrets. But instead of just searching for items or solving puzzles, you're unraveling these deeply personal, strange tales about each family member. What makes it stand out is how Giant Sparrow tailors each memory into a completely different gameplay experience. One moment you're controlling a kite in the sky, next you're a cat. Each story reflecting the character whose life or death it represents. It's a narrative game at heart, but even then, the gameplay is so fluid, woven into the storytelling in moments that sneak up on you. The Finch family doesn't just have bad luck, they've had tragedy after tragedy, and you're experiencing it in the most immersive way possible. There's this scene with Lewis where you're both working in a factory while at the same time daydreaming about this fantasy kingdom. It's unsettling, yet beautiful. You're controlling both these realities at once, the mundane and the surreal, and it builds towards something you can feel happening, but knowing doesn't make it easier. Edith Finch taps into something super emotional. It's melancholic, but stunning. You'll get absorbed into this thoughtful take on family, memory, and stories, and it'll leave you wondering how games can mess with how you think about them as a medium.
Light hand animation at 30%.
Coming in next is Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon. Armored Core 6 was just the callback so many players had been waiting for, yeah? From Software returned to the mecha genre. It's not Dark Souls this time, and they're not worried about full-on open-world fantasy. Here, it's all about those brutal, tactical mech battles and building your perfect, personalized machine. You're tinkering with giant robots, customizing weapons, thrusters, armor. It's this deep layer of strategy that feels like you're preparing for an expensive sci-fi chess match. And the engine goes hard. You'll be boosting your mecha across these vast industrial areas, with missiles flying, sparks lighting up from impacts, and everything feels massive. What From Software does in Fires of Rubicon mirrors the quiet spaces of Dark Souls, but in an entirely different way, focusing on machines over knights. Then, the bosses. The moment you face off with some towering mechanical beast, it switches from precision movement to aggression, like pausing just right to let your next attack hurt as much as possible. At its best, it tosses you into a dance of high-speed air battles, followed by moments of seriously intense planning in the menu. Is your build too slow? Are your weapons focused enough? The game demands players to be both quick on their feet and thoughtful in the garage afterwards. It's a whole calculated chaos vibe, filtered through a rusty metallic lens that doesn't let up until the end. Now, let's move on to Crash Bandicoot and Sane Trilogy. Here's the thing about Crash Bandicoot and Sane Trilogy. It shows respect for the madness of its past. Those old Crash games were notorious for their difficulty, but they became absolute classics, right? This remaster is more than graphics. The way they took the iconic 90s platformer and enhanced nearly every detail while keeping the spirit of sliding, spinning, and smashing boxes alive. It's like stepping back into the original madness at the height of PlayStation, only shinier and smoother. The Sane Trilogy includes Crash 1, 2, and Warped, and while the core mechanics are the same, the jumping, running, dodging TNT, it's the way the visuals and improved controls smooth out the old frustrations while keeping the challenge intact. Players are still going to miss those gap jumps, still get smacked around by that tricky depth perception and timing issues in some stages, but it's somehow less rage-inducing with the updated presentation. And those moments, like the boulder chase in the first game or speeding through futuristic highways in Warped, they hit better now. Vicarious Visions figured out how to bring the nostalgia, but without making it feel dated. You're still going to get your frustrations, but it's all beautifully nostalgic in a way that keeps you hooked through all three games without missing a beat. The remaster manages to make Crash feel both retro and surprisingly modern, which is a tricky balance to pull off. Next, we've got Gears of War 3. Gears of War 3 is kind of where Gears hit its peak in many ways. That visceral, chunky combat? Still there. Chainsawing through enemies and diving in and out of cover never felt so tight. You've got new enemies, bigger stakes, and honestly far better pacing than the previous entries. Plus, the team over at Epic Games knew what they were doing here. Finishing up the trilogy meant they had to make it feel massive while still grounded in that grimy, brutal world. There's this sense of finality to Gears 3, especially with Marcus and Dom's storylines. I mean, Dom's storyline alone crushed a lot of players. You remember that moment? The music, the sacrifice, it's raw. It's what makes Gears more than just smashing aliens and grubs. The emotional debt to the characters you've been with for 2 games, you feel it. The multiplayer also went hard, with Horde mode basically perfecting what started in 2. It's not about mindless killing, there's strategy there, and suddenly everyone's working together, setting up defenses, trying to survive those waves. And having 4-player co-op in the campaign, it pushed players into war zones like never before, letting you and your buddies experience this fight on a massive scale. It's just as gritty and bombastic, but Gears 3 knew when to pull back and give space to those human moments, and that's where it earned its place in the series. Next up is EVERSPACE 2. Now, this is the space shooter that takes big swings and hits with a ton of ambition. Unlike its roguelite predecessor, this one goes full wild with open-world exploration, letting you pilot your ship through stunning, handcrafted sectors in the galaxy. It's space combat, but layered with RPG mechanics, gear, leveling, loadout customization. It creates this blend where you're not just zipping around shooting stuff, you're fine-tuning your ship to play the way you want. The more loot you find, the better you can optimize your crafts for different playstyles. The visual design makes it feel like you're exploring these otherworldly, neon-lit environments, where alien debris and enormous ship graveyards somehow make even the quiet moments scenic. Floating through open space? Gorgeous. Flying through tight caverns or ruined space stations? Tense. And when combat starts, it's almost like space dogfighting meets calculated planning, knowing when to use shields or unleash missiles, or just weaving between enemy fire. While the first one may have been all about runs and resetting, EVERSPACE 2 promises progress. It's consistent. Your upgrades stick, missions evolve, and there's a clear sense of journey, whether you're looting pirate bases or knocking out enemy squadrons while scavenging for better gear. If you want something that feels fast, a bit heavier on story than the first ever dared, with a steady sense of continued improvement, this sequel takes it all up a level.
No.
Another solid entry on the list is Journey to the Savage Planet. Journey to the Savage Planet has this almost goofy but smart combo that works so well. It throws you into the shoes of an explorer, sent to catalog a mysterious planet. But what really makes it stick is the humor and charm injected into every moment. The planet is literal insanity, filled with bizarre creatures, like these puffball birds that explode when you hit them, or dangerous mushrooms that don't care if you step on them. But rather than a survival game where there's a heavy threat around each corner, it's more about exploration and figuring out how this weird ecosystem clicks together. The tone here is light and playful. Your AI companion constantly gives snarky commentary, and the corporate overlords back on Earth, who basically sent you to die, by the way, keep popping in to remind you that, yeah, you're more expendable than they think. So, you're solving environmental puzzles, gathering resources, upgrading your tech, all with a wink and a grin. The art style has this cartoony, vibrant aesthetic, making the world just as ridiculous as it is beautiful. But underneath all the silliness is a pretty damn well-built exploration game. You've got these Metroidvania elements where you're constantly unlocking more ways to navigate the planet, scanning flora and fauna, and piecing together how to survive in this literally savage world. Though it doesn't take itself too seriously, it's one of those rare games that blends humor with genuinely smart design.
Roger, target acquired.
Now, let's move on to Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands. Ghost Recon Wildlands is where Ghost Recon took the open world trend and went full throttle into it. You're dropped into Bolivia, and it's massive. Seriously. You're going from dense jungles to salt flats to mountains, all while picking apart a cartel piece by piece. And while it's got that Tom Clancy feel, tactical, methodical, it leaves so much freedom to do things your way. One minute you're sneaking into a base under the cover of night, marking enemies, sinking sniper shots with your squad, and the next, you're causing chaos in a helicopter midday. What makes it work on this list is how dynamically it shifts based on who's playing. Solo, you're commanding your AI squad, lining up tactical maneuvers, and making each move feel tight. But drop 3 friends in, it's a whole new ballgame. And then there's the world itself. Ubisoft absolutely nailed the scale. It's not only huge, but it feels alive with its constant skirmishes between factions and rebels, its varied environments, and a story that evolves based on how you tackle each mission. It's chaos, but it's organized chaos, and that's where the appeal really comes in. It's your battlefield to toy with. Up next is State of Decay 2. There's something about this game that makes it more than just another zombie game. You're not mowing down hordes for points. This one's about survival in the bleakest sense. It's punishing, but not in a get good kind of way. More like you have to be smart, because every attack, every action, almost every decision could get someone in your community killed. That's right, it's not just you anymore. You've got a whole crew to worry about. You're constructing bases, fortifying them, scavenging for resources, all while managing your survivors' needs. It's this weird combination of action and sim where the stakes are ridiculously high. A character dies here, poof, they're gone. Your decisions hit harder, and when you lose a town member, it feels like failure. You weren't building just for fun, you were doing it to keep people alive. Losing someone means more than just starting over. It means figuring out how things unraveled. And co-op? It's fun for all the right reasons, working together to cover each other's backs while scavenging or risking everything to take down a plague heart. It's that perfect middle ground between tense zombie action and community management, always reminding you that individual survival means nothing if your whole group can't make it.
Well, I recognize defeat when I see it. If I'm gonna be your captive, let me introduce myself.
Now, it's time for Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord is on this list for pure, raw ambition. You're looking at a medieval sim on a massive scale, and it's one of those games where the systems just barely hold together because there's so much happening. One second you're managing your humble little band of warriors, and the next you're getting pulled into these huge battles with hundreds of troops on the field at the same time. It's overwhelming, chaotic, and kind of genius. The whole Mount & Blade experience is about freedom. You can either try to be a king or just roam the land as a mercenary, fighting for whoever pays the most. Politics, trade, war, it's all connected. The world here feels less like a sandbox and more like its own ecosystem, with factions at war, economies fluctuating, and intrigue playing out in the background as you're out there charging into your next siege. Win a battle? Feels massive. Lose one? Yeah, good luck recovering from that fallout. And then there's the battle system itself. Standing in the middle of a field, watching your army clash with the enemies, then charging in yourself is just visceral. Every swing matters, every block and arrow counts. You feel the weight of leading, and there's just something undeniably cool about rallying an army of peasants and turning them into your own personal force to be reckoned with. Let's not skip over Voidigo. If you love chaos in a candy-colored roguelike package, Voidigo might be exactly what you're looking for. Imagine smashing Hades together with the absurd randomness of Binding of Isaac. Then crank it up with hyperactive visuals that honestly look like the inside of a neon-bombed arcade. It's fast, it's unpredictable, and somehow that unpredictability is its best feature. Here's how it goes down. You're hopping between different worlds, fighting off these void creatures while picking up ridiculous weaponry and power-ups. The movement is silky smooth with dodge rolls, dashes, and quick bursts of speed, giving you just enough room to survive the next impossible fight. And the art style is functionally absurd. Everything's got this squishy cartoon energy that makes the whole experience feel chaotic and playful, even when you're staring down a massive void beast ready to stomp your head in. The boss battles change things up too. It's not your typical find the boss at the end formula. They chase you across levels. Basically, they hunt you, and it gives the game this constant tension that forces you to stay on your toes. Voidigo keeps throwing you curveballs. One moment you're exploring, the next you're in a whirlwind of bullets, death beams, and the sound of your controller barely keeping up with your dodges. Wild, unpredictable, and strangely addicting. Next, we've got Hell Let Loose. If there's one modern war game where strategy and fear feel legitimate, it's Hell Let Loose. This isn't your average run-and-gun shooter. Instead, it's like you're tossed into the middle of an actual World War II battle, and the first thing you realize? You're a small cog in a massive machine. Forget one-man army striking. Here, you're relying on communication, teamwork, and actual tactical executions. It can be brutal, but in the best possible way. First off, the maps. Enormous reconstructions of actual World War II battlefields. Normandy, perhaps. Getting off a tank and walking through meticulous war-torn countryside isn't just immersive. It physically feels like you could lose yourself in it. Artillery is pounding in the distance, and that constant back-and-forth struggle for control of areas. It gives a real sense of being in the trenches. The game's a bit hardcore, too. One shot can end your run. It's not about speed, it's about patience. Every decision matters. Being a commander here means you're a strategist, not just someone calling in airstrikes. It pushes you to think big, to coordinate with others, whether you're storming enemy lines, defending trenches, or laying down suppressing fire while squads tactically reposition. And the way teamwork feels necessary, communicating via radio with squad leaders, laying down markers while praying that air support comes at the right time, it nails that sense of war is chaos. But maybe, just maybe, strategy is how you win. Coming in next is Nier Automata. What makes Nier Automata as close to perfect as it gets is a whole mix, but the secret ingredient is how it refuses to fit into one genre, yet somehow makes each part sing. Yeah, Platinum Games brought tight combat with endless slashing, complex dodges, and seamless combos, but beneath that sword-swinging surface, the game is deep, like narratively, philosophically deep, but also quirky deep. You're playing as 2B, this smooth, almost detached android slogging through a world where machines and humans are long gone, but don't for a second think this is just another action game. The multiple endings? Let's talk about those. Finishing the game once isn't really finishing it. You're meant to run through this complex, intertwining narrative from multiple perspectives, revealing layers of existential dread, android politics, and odd philosophical rambling about the meaning of life. Yeah, it goes there. And somehow it merges those themes with insane bullet hell sections, puzzle solving, open world exploration, and hacking minigames. If it sounds like a lot, it is. But here's the thing, it works. And then there's the music. Honestly, the soundtrack deserves its own awards at this point. It ebbs and flows with haunting melodies during quiet moments, only to ramp up with intense, soaring vocals mid-boss fight. Every aspect of the game pulls you deeper into this almost melancholic, surreal world where the more you play, the cooler, yet more devastating, the whole experience becomes. You're not just playing Nier Automata, you're constantly unraveling it. If you're a fan of the Diablo series, then V Rising is the best one for you right now. V Rising takes this whole vampire thing and just runs with it. Think of ARPG elements from Diablo, but with a survival twist. And you've got a game where you're not just dungeon diving, you're building an empire of darkness. You're an undead just waking up from a long nap, and now it's time to reclaim the world. But instead of being over-the-top supernatural, you're hunting, crafting, and building your own castle. Yeah, you create your fortress like some gothic sim situation alongside the blood-sucking. What sets it apart from just another survival craft game? The vampire systems feel genuinely unique. You're not just managing hunger or thirst, it's bloodlust. You've got to feed on creatures and humans, and what you feed on actually matters. Draining a certain blood type isn't just about surviving, it gives you buffs and abilities. And then there's the time aspect. Daytime is punishing. Staying out in the sun for too long? Yeah, you'll burn to a crisp. It forces you to really plan out your movements, traveling mostly at night or hugging the shadows, which changes that typical ARPG rhythm. But where the magic really kicks in is multiplayer, raiding others' castles, battling vampires who've also set up shop. It's brutal and deeply satisfying. It also has the kind of progression where you're always juggling between being a predator and constantly looking over your shoulder. Like the more you grow in power, the more you feel hunted yourself. V Rising merges survival and ARPG systems in a smart way, with a rich vampire lore that just feels right. And to wrap things up, we've got Doomsday Hunters. For an indie roguelite, Doomsday Hunters is a speed demon bullet circus of energy, and it's insane. You're not surviving here, you're pure offense from minute one. It's twin-stick, top-down chaos with procedurally generated maps and enemies coming at you like they're never gonna stop. Instead of focusing on storytelling or balance, Doomsday Hunters takes the throw every wild mechanic in approach. And somehow it works, because it's all about satisfying instant combat. No fluff, no filler. The game thrives on its randomness, and yet that's what keeps it so fresh. You've got the typical roguelite stuff. New weapons, perks, powers every run, and then multiplier systems that seriously up the ante. Want to build a teleporting grenade thrower with flame bullets? You unlock powers and upgrades that can turn a regular run into something that looks like a fever dream from a late 90s arcade cabinet. The pace is unapologetically frantic, which gives each run this edge of unpredictability. Every corner packed with constant decisions on how to stay alive and maximize destruction. And let's talk bosses. Each one feels like its own mini chaos ballet. These fights throw the screen into pure madness, but the learning curve here is fair. Every boss attack pattern is something you can figure out if you survive long enough, meaning that the longer you last, the more empowered you feel. You want that loop, over and over, dealing with overwhelming odds only to come out on top after a few retries. Fast, ridiculous, and always chasing that next perfect run. And there you have it, folks. Thanks for watching, and make sure to hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed this video.